It's high time we do a good old silly worst list. And what better subject than the flaming garbage pail side of adult animation? For all the recent intelligence, forethought, and finesse adult cartoons have brought us. Along the way, we've had some train wreck episodes that are simply unmatched in their toxicity, stupidity, and crudeness, all under the veil of being aimed at adults. So today, we're going to be looking through some of adult animation's most hated episodes. Let's check out the top 10 worst adult cartoon episodes. And just a warning ahead that obviously we'll be discussing some adult concepts in this episode. I'll also be saving most of the episodes I've already talked about for the honorable mentions to try and give room for some of the, no bad episodes. So with that said, on to the countdown. Number 10. Family Guy, Trump Guy. This is just a fine example of a bland, tasteless, obnoxious modern Family Guy episode that's blindingly in love with itself. This week in Quahog, Peter becomes the new press secretary for the White House, and the Griffins all move in, and Meg's touched inappropriately by Donald Trump. Jeepers, I feel dirty just giving you the plot synopsis. Donald Trump and Peter ultimately end up in a chicken-style duke-out, which admittedly is still pretty entertaining from an animation perspective. But generally, the episode's more like watching TMZ. It's just a never-ending rambling of pure gossipy smut. Often the characters will just talk straight to the camera, announcing whatever political scandal suits the time. I don't mind a good political commentary, but this just feels more like continually dumping on people's private lives. Like, I don't care if some political figure got plastic surgery or who did the dirty with who. That's their, and in some cases, the police's business. And as usual, Meg is relentlessly tormented. But of course it's painted as better when Meg has been dolled up by Donald Trump's daughter Ivanka.
Ivanka Trump has a gentle breeze indoors.
And then we get the notorious moment where Meg is touched by Trump inappropriately.
Oh my god!
Oh please, every president since Washington has done this.
But really? Of all the possible bigotry, injustice, and general childish behavior this guy has done? Of all the clever political satire you could have made, you went with him touching Meg inappropriately. It's apparently based on a real sex scandal, but surely the writers could go with a smarter commentary than this. It's just such wasted potential. I mean, the show has a $2 million budget per episode. Surely some of that could go into the writing. This one's at the start of the list though, as I found the final third act okay. I mean, Trump and Peter punching each other outside the White House is pretty entertaining. There's also some good narrative within it, if less than subtle. And I think that's the best way to take this one. Family Guy's creators are frightened, and that's perfectly understandable. So am I.
From our family to yours, we're very frightened.
This may be a boring, attention-grabbing, substandard, irritating, gossipy episode, but hey, at least the end message seems to be an earnest one. I also did get a chuckle from a couple of jokes, like when Trump put his hair in a cotton candy machine for his makeover. Number 9. The Simpsons. Every Man's Dream. There was a surprisingly big build-up to this episode. Many viewers were hit with a lot of advertising saying Homer and Marge divorce, and we were treated to one of the most miserable, bitter episodes of the whole series. We start the episode with Bart gleefully pulling the plug on his father, which does serve to give us a very good feel for the general spirit of this episode. Homer gets narcolepsy and decides to use it as an excuse to never help any of his family with anything.
Dad, can you drive me to Millhouse's?
Narcolepsy.
There's a spider in my room!
Narcolepsy.
Dr. Hibbert called in a prescription for you to pick up.
Narcolepsy.
And here we run into the primary problem. I actually don't mind Marge and Homer getting a divorce, but it's all about how a message is delivered. And in this episode, just about every segment is weirdly bitter.
Oh, every time I have beer on my breath, you assume I've been drinking. Oh, that's a long one.
In the Homer we have here, there's no good, well-meaning nature. This Homer just uses everyone around him, with no empathy whatsoever for his loved ones. Marge has, unsurprisingly, had enough, and they do indeed split up.
What's going on here?
Lisa's cut to shreds, and everyone, except unsurprisingly Bart, is miserable.
Why is Daddy going away? Is it my fault? Just kidding, I have been waiting for this.
There's a plot about Marge and Homer getting new partners, and they're both nice, but they're completely forgettable characters. And they give the big middle finger to the viewer in the end anyway by announcing it all to be a dream. Every man's dream is just a non-stop attack on love and relationships through unfunny jokes and resentful comments.
I pity you!
Frankly, there was actually only one joke I chuckled at in this episode.
That other dream was just a dream? No!
I think there's a reason Homer and Marge have been a pretty content couple ever since this, because all the bitterness of the last 27 years of their marriage is concentrated into this episode.
Simpson, where are your shoes?
Narcolepsy.
Oh, sorry.
Number 8. Bojack Horseman. Prickly Muffin. Although I normally love this series, this was one episode I found so unpleasant and uncomfortable that I didn't ever watch it again. It's a shame too, because I like how the episode addresses the toxic effects fame can have on many child stars.
Who wants to see me take a dump on that sofa?
And how it can completely mess them up in adulthood. I mean, I'd argue we're seeing an explosion of child stars in the YouTube industry. After all, when you're adored by countless people at a young age and given everything you could ever want, why keep growing as a person? But anyway, this is essentially what's happened to Sarah Lynn. Bojack and Sarah reunite, but she's become an overprivileged child star brat.
Can your friends at least take the artwork off the wall first?
Ooh, I wanna say yes, but no.
Okay, good talk.
Which is a realistic scenario, but I personally found it so unpleasant to watch her continually using Bojack. I really do dislike that shtick in cartoons where we watch the protagonist's home get trashed until they finally put their foot down and ask the supposed friend to leave. And that's exactly what this episode's devoted to showing us. Sarah Lynn treating Bojack in his home like a doormat because Bojack feels guilty about how he treated her as a child. And the more and more guests she invites into Bojack's house, the more entitled and insufferable she gets. I guess I just don't like seeing people's kindness taken advantage of. Even if Bojack is partially to blame for this, it's just a chore to watch Bojack caving to Sarah's continually worse demands. After decades, Bojack is desperately trying to relive the last shreds of the only good family life he's ever had. But he's just continually disappointed by Sarah Lynn, because she's too long gone. Perhaps it was still an important message to establish Sarah Lynn's character. I mean, I do still vividly remember this episode.
I'm at a place right now where I never need to grow as a person or rise to an occasion because I can constantly just surround myself with sycophants and enablers until I die tragically young.
What?
Yeah, it's pretty much too late for me.
Number 7. Rick and Morty, Interdimensional Cable 2. As a sequel to one of the most acclaimed episodes of the series, it's always understandable when a sequel can't quite recapture the magic of the original. In this instance though, it comes off as though the staff already knew they'd nailed it the first time. So rather than trying to recapture the magic of the first, they opted to just run through a more crass, bare bones version of the first, just to get it out of the way, which even the characters admit to the audience.
I don't understand.
Yeah, me neither. We pretty much nailed it the first time.
The episode opens on a pretty brutal scene of Jerry dying from poisoning as he's rushed to the hospital by his panicked family, where he's asked by doctors to donate his, John Thomas Tadger. Ew. In order to save a dying alien activist. And this entire side of the story is spent watching Jerry grow increasingly desperate as all the other characters pressure him into donating his, Long John Silver, including his wife. Charming human being, that Beth.
Beth, what kind of man would say something like that if the universe needed his penis?
Well, Jerry, what kind of wife would I be if I did anything to stand in your way?
Culminating into yet more ugly bickering between the couple and ultimately yet more humiliation for Jerry. Fun?
This guy's trying to get out of giving away his penis.
While Jerry goes in for treatment, Morty's family watches TV in the waiting room, where we're treated to more interdimensional cable segments. But this time around, the segments are mostly just single concepts copy-pasted from the first, and passed along with no real passion or flavor. From Man vs. Car to Octopus Man, the segments mostly just share a homogeneous callousness with an average minimum of one person mutilated each.
Gross. Does all interdimensional TV have to rely on juvenile violence?
While Interdimensional Cable 2 isn't aggressively bad, it's about the worst we've ever seen from Rick and Morty. I personally found it an unpleasant, cringeworthy, callous, and overall dull watch. And when compared with the rest of Rick and Morty's creative lineup, there's less of those quirky explorations of theoretical concepts to help balance it out. Number 6. King of the Hill. Those Canadians. I actually consider this the most morally ugly King of the Hill episode that I've ever seen. In fact, the episode's purely about passive-aggressive sneers and tribe mentality against foreigners. In order to establish a sense of resentment towards Canada?
Wait, which neighbors would call the cops? Everybody's here. Except the Canadians.
Seriously, there doesn't seem to be any other point to this episode. Hank and Peggy get new Canadian neighbors, who they're suspicious of, but decide to try and be nice to them. But all that happens is it turns out they were right to be suspicious of their neighbors. So Hank has to be a rotten neighbor to get rid of them once and for all.
Why can't America make a decent ale?
Probably because we're too busy making medical breakthroughs and blockbuster movies and going to the moon.
Half these lines are just nationalistic jeering at one another's countries. But finally, the police get sick of Hank and his new neighbor Gordon's drunken fights, and decide to throw them both in the slammer, where Hank proceeds to get out because he's an American, and refuses to help Gordon because he's a Canadian. I don't know if I take so much offense to this because I'm half Canadian myself, but it's like, Canadians are the nicest people in the world. Why would you do this?
My Mason could kick your McCullum's ass.
Oh, that does it, eh? Yay! That'll learn him.
So, according to this episode, it was crazy of them to lower their guard against people outside their country and welcome them. You get back to that Stone Age tribal mentality of fear at once, rednecks. Hank comes around in the last 60 seconds of the episode, but it doesn't save an otherwise resentful, pig-headed episode. And for number 5... The Simpsons. Lisa Goes Gaga. There are certain cartoon episodes you can watch that make you feel annoyed or disappointed in writers you otherwise respect. Then there's the rock bottom category of episodes that make you feel outright violated just by watching them. I know I've talked about this before in worse Simpsons episodes, but there is simply no Simpsons episode that compares to how vehemently infuriated I feel after watching this. When I see this episode, I have to vent to someone. Vent on what a miserable, suck-up, character-twisting, poison cesspool filth of an episode this is. I feel like if I bottled up my hate for this episode, it could power the city of Tokyo for a week. Please excuse me if I'm getting hyperbolic, but every time I have the misfortune of catching this episode, my stomach just drops in revulsion, and I feel sad as I realize The Simpsons will never recover from this. I think a part of the problem with this episode is the creators had no idea what to say about Lady Gaga, so they focused solely on glorifying her shallow cereal box philosophy of believing in yourself.
I had some very tough times myself before I became a superstar at age 22. Everything is gonna be fine. You better yet?
And how she changed the most free-thinking character in the show, Lisa, and turned everyone else in the town into worshipping zealots of Lady Gaga. There's not even a satire or commentary on Lady Gaga here. No, we couldn't even have that. Instead, we just get the repeated shtick of everyone worshipping how wacky and wonderful she is. Although I could easily complain for 30 minutes on each subtle nuance of how this episode is a massive insult to not just the Simpsons characters, but any person who rejects a celebrity worship mentality, let's just leave it at this episode is just poorly written and pointless. It dumps on all the Simpsons' previous integrity they've built into their characters, all in the name of creating this ego trip for Lady Gaga. After the tidal wave of fan backlash the writers received from this vanity project, the creators made a massive 180, never even mentioning or writing a sentence about Lady Gaga again. And thank Jeebus, it remains, very justifiably in my opinion, the lowest rated Simpsons episode ever, and is by far the worst Simpsons episode ever conceived. Number 4. Family Guy. Dead Dog Walking. I admit, this episode gave me the occasional smirk chuckle? But jeebus, it's getting hard for me to hate Brian any more than I already do. So the story this time's about bitter marriages. Because Brian's married now, and that's the most emotionally mature story the writers seem to be able to manage. We start by Brian leaving his wife Jess to choke to death at a restaurant.
Ha!
Which I guess isn't that unexpectedly psychopathic for Brian, but it still manages to irritate me. And the show then begins to attempt its sad attempt at making an edgy, cynical view of marriage. Although Jess survives, Brian then proceeds to make his 174th attempt to prove he's the biggest scumbag on the planet. How? Well, because he has a wife now, Brian completely lets himself go. Somehow even more than he already has? He wasn't exactly the exercise or doing stuff type before. And Jess is forced to do everything for him. Until eventually, his exploitation of her becomes so draining that in return, she tries to get him euthanized.
Please, it can't end like this.
Ah, what a charming episode. What could possibly be pleasant about watching yet another cruel, spite-filled Family Guy relationship with all the depth of a spoon? Absolutely nothing! Why then did they make an episode about it? I guess because it's Family Guy. A show where meaningful relationships are non-existent and 80% of the world is composed of spite.
Gosh, maybe that's what true marriage is. Two people who want each other to die.
Now you're getting it! So much beauty!
Ugh, pardon me, but I just really hate this episode. Just everything its overly cynical edgelord philosophy stands for. What else can be said? We're watching a newly married couple try to murder one another behind their backs. It's that typical vindictive spirit of a modern, thoughtlessly put together Family Guy episode, and leaves us with nothing but the writer's twisted, lazily nihilistic message about life and relationships. What would be saddest, though, is if the writers or Seth actually believe this stuff. And the third worst adult cartoon episode is South Park, White People Renovating Houses. I've chosen this modern South Park episode for the list because, well, this is the episode where I essentially gave up on South Park and stopped watching it regularly. I had finally grown sick of it just becoming too overly complicated and just a chore to watch. I do still deeply respect this series though. I just miss the old days where an episode wasn't just the social commentary of the week being repeatedly bludgeoned over my head with endless symbolism, where I have to study message boards and Wikipedia articles to have any idea what the hell Trey and Matt are trying to say to me. It's like this episode is yelling its message at me, with barely any jokes in between to balance the episode out. Yet I still need a Wikipedia page to even figure out what it's trying to say to me. So the story is basically, the town is acting like oblivious idiots while Cartman manipulates his girlfriend Heidi. Then we get more soapboxing with no interesting character development in between that isn't hidden behind yet more soapboxing. And I swear half the episode is just Randy acting like an idiot, showing how wasteful white people can be with renovating houses.
There's never a dull moment. Guys, are you ready to see your renovation? Come on, white people renovating houses.
It's worth pointing out many of my white friends can barely afford their rent, let alone renovating a house they actually own. So many of the moments in this episode just make me want to see Cartman pay. It's cringeworthy to watch Cartman make fun of mentally abusive relationships as some happy music plays. And it's just awful watching a kind, caring girl like Heidi being manipulated by Cartman. What on earth could this young lady actually see in this loony little sociopath?
I want to make him happy. Could you tell him I'm gonna try a lot harder?
In fact, the episode seems to celebrate it as though it's funny. Truly, the most satisfying moment in this series was seeing Wendy beat the ever-loving crap out of Cartman. In fact, let's cut back to Wendy's fight right now. Ah, that feels better. Let's see that again. Ah, that's the stuff.
I'm finished!
And the second worst adult cartoon episode is Brickleberry, 2 weeks notice. Just a warning ahead, this one can be kinda gross. You ready? You sure? Well, okay. Ugh. For those who don't know, Brickleberry's mainly about a bunch of redneck forest rangers being scum to one another. They're mostly not too competent at their jobs, and that's about it really. In fact, this is one of the forest rangers right here, Denzel. And here we see him making out and scoodly pooping with a 90-year-old. Only for her to die immediately after. Ugh.
Uh-oh.
You know though, I suppose that's a pretty awesome way to go. At the ripe old age of 90, that is one hell of a parting gift. I don't mind two consenting, differently aged adults having fun, but I still feel like this particular romantic encounter wasn't the most openly pleasant one to broadcast on a television program. So with her dead, Denzel then starts to scoodly poop with her 60-year-old daughter. Oh wait, she dies seconds after as well. I suppose this humor is meant to be edgy to the pants-on head insane?
Myrtle, I think your mama dead. Myrtle? God damn it.
And the rest of the episode is no different. Our main character Steve is a scum of the earth, and he finds out that he's deathly ill due to an STD and will die within the next 24 hours. To which all his friends are laughing about. So he aspires to change his ways and do lots of good deeds in the time he has left. Well, that's not so bad, but it doesn't take long for him to decide there's no reason to and reverts back to his old scumbag self. Brickleberry is a show that doesn't even deserve an analysis. It tries so pitifully hard to be edgy, uncomfortable, and politically incorrect, but rarely ever manages to come up with a single creative thought whatsoever. And this episode's the ultimate example of that. Non-stop, painfully delivered shock humor surrounding an uninteresting, mean-spirited toilet swirl of a plot. And before we get to number one, let's go through some quick, dishonorable mentions. I've covered my share of lousy adult cartoon episodes in the past, so I'll just run through the ones worth mentioning here. Brian's a Bad Father from Family Guy. This remains what I personally consider the number one worst Family Guy episode. From Brian being irredeemably uncaring to his son, to Peter shooting his friends, to the most revolting joke I've ever heard in my life. This episode is vile in simply every way, shape, and form.
I know, my dad wrote that one for me. Again with this?
Anyway, South Park, Mr. Garrison's fancy new vagina. Yep, this is still the worst South Park episode. Everything you need to know on why this is so unforgivably awful can be gathered from the title and the visuals on the screen, most of which I'm not showing for both your and my video editor's good health. Ren seeks help. I've talked about this episode a couple of times before, and my opinion on it hasn't changed. It continues to be the worst piece of animation I'm willing to talk about. It was clear Ren didn't need help. The creator John Crickfalusi needed help. Adult Party Cartoon was bad enough as is, but this episode reaches the ultimate level of rotten. Anyway, on to number one. And the number one worst adult cartoon episode is Family Guy. Stewie is on Shantae.
On the seats. Oh God, I think another one's coming! I don't see it. I think it's coming out of my mouth! There's more! They're coming out of everywhere! Kill me! This hurts too much! Holy
You know, let's torch another lousy Family Guy episode together, shall we? Like old times. In fact, let's torch what is possibly the lowest rated Family Guy episode of all time. It's a prime example of how tired and miserable Seth and his staff seem to be under contract to keep making the show. It's so dreadfully abysmal that not even CPR combined with an intensive care drip feed could keep it going. How this cartoon manages to get more bleak, tired, and eye-rollingly cynical per season is a feat unto itself. So this episode, we're watching Stewie get pregnant with Brian and have, children? Well, they're like homunculi dog-human creatures. What I like about this episode, though, is it does give us the straight man, as it seems like Brian is as jaw-droppingly disturbed and horrified at the events unfolding as the audience is. In fact, only Stewie's really treating it as a normal occurrence, and, you know, well, it's Stewie.
This feels incredibly wrong.
We're going to want these, Brian, believe me.
But the self-awareness doesn't take away from how creepy this is. The episode is so unapologetically vulgar that I worry I might get demonetized just for discussing the events that take place. The episode starts off innocently enough, with Stewie just wishing Brian would spend more time with him. And after 3 failed attempts to get his attention, Stewie decides the most sensible course of action is to have a baby with him. I see. Well, not really. So Stewie promptly creates a machine and uses a sample of Brian's fur DNA to impregnate himself. We then cut to the next morning where Stewie gives Brian the news, who's understandably horrified.
I think I'm gonna throw up. Our child is growing inside me! Stop talking like that!
And all that follows is a long sequence of the same 3 jokes repeated over and over. Stewie thinking that him having babies is completely normal.
It's for the baby. It's for the baby.
Stewie forgetting that he is a baby himself.
Look at how tiny all these clothes are. It's so adorable. I mean, what kind of feet can fit into these shoes? Your feet.
And Brian wishing he was dead.
If you ever lay a finger on me again, I'll burn you in your bed. Could you do that now, please?
Though to the episode's credit, the repetition doesn't get too much, because next we get Stewie's water breaking, and we're treated to the tedious, graphic, disturbing birthing scene, where the abominations of nature violently shoot out.
Ah, kill me! This hurts too much! Holy!
And the rest of the episode is dedicated to showcasing how critically unfit Brian and Stewie are as parents, as we see them act utterly indifferent to the well-being of their children, as they let them melt, drown, and get shredded by lawnmowers.
Yeah, the deaf one didn't hear Joe's lawnmower.
And when they inevitably find out that having babies wasn't actually necessary for them to be friends again, they nonchalantly admit they never cared for them at all and drop them off at an animal shelter. At least they're out of the hands of those two. In the end, all Stewie is on Shantae is a crass, calloused, pointless experiment in shock value. But you know what? I enjoyed talking about it with you. And as I've said previously, most adult animation has never looked so good in basically any time in history. With the introduction of Netflix originals, the floodgates have been open for all sorts of indie, underground, experimental adult cartoons, not afraid to shy away from any subject. Whether people like it or not, they'll talk about it. And I can assure you, the cycle of insightful animation for adults is only going to continue. And if you think I missed a particularly lousy adult cartoon episode, feel free to leave it in the comments below. And as always, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time. Na na na.